All right, I'm with Chaz Nuttycombe, the Executive Director of State Navigate. They just completed a poll on the redistricting campaign, and they also looked at Governor Abigail Spanberger's approval rating. Thanks for talking to me, Chaz, and give me the headlines, give me the top lines, and let me know what you got.
Yeah, absolutely, Brandon. I've loved your work since I was a teenager. So thanks for doing this exclusive and
Yeah,
having me on.
of course. So tell me about it. What are the results? What did you find out?
Yeah, absolutely. So the yes campaign is up by five. And it's pretty standard where it's, most Democrats are voting yes, most Republicans voting no. Um, there's a lot of interesting kind of tidbits that our team wrote about, and you can read about that in the on State Navigate. It'll be live by the time you post this, the article, and the I think the kind of co-headline here is the governor's approval. So this is similar to obviously the GMU poll, right? I mean, we are not one to herd, so this is not herding. It's not like we're like, oh, let's see what GMU did. Right? We have our own like different approaches and everything. Honestly, when I finished the poll, we were waiting it. When I ran the script, um, I was kind of surprised, honestly. I thought that after waiting, yes would be up maybe 2 to 4 points. Um, with it's technically up when you round 51 to 46, so that's 6 points. But when you actually take the decibels, right, it's a 5 point lead. But so the governor's approval, very interesting. Uh, there are some groups that are moving away from her. She won big with lower income voters, and they are very much moving away from her, right? She ran on affordability. Maybe they feel like she hasn't delivered that. But what was interesting though is that higher income voters also moving away from her a lot, not as much as the lowest income voters. She's doing fine with middle class voters, actually, or maybe middle class to upper middle class, I guess. People who make 50 to 99,000 a year, right? She didn't really have much change compared to what our late October survey had for like whether people were going to vote for her or Winsome Sears. Um, but yeah, so approvals 47% and disapproval at 47%. So
So she's pretty even, and it's basically the same as what the recent GMU poll. There hasn't been much change in either poll. What do you think that the no campaign to against the redistricting campaign has a chance at winning this on election day?
yeah, but here's something interesting is so election day in 2025 was what 57% of the overall electorate. A majority of the expected electorate in our survey actually plans to vote early. Um, Now, that being said, it's a very wide margin that say that they are going to vote early. But this is the thing about voters or people when they take polls is that they think very highly of themselves, like, oh yeah, I'm gonna go vote early, and then they don't, right? So it was only like maybe I think in our late October survey, which obviously did really well last year, 41% of people said they were going to vote on election day, right? Well, that's not really what happened. But if you take the error and apply it to this poll, you would get the people who say that they're going to vote election day. Probably election day would be 48% of the overall electorate. That's what happened in 2024. And that was kind of the thing that really sunk Republicans. And what is interesting, also, this is in the article, the remaining people who say that they have not voted yet but plan on voting early, mostly in person. are bluer than 2025, and this is kind of like the same time frame, right? In terms of like how many days from the election we polled, um, just about. However, I think maybe a reason for this is because there's been a you know reduction in access to the satellites. That's like my best guess. But and we'll be able to track this. State Navigate has like a model of the partisanship using lieutenant governor results. It's not a forecast, but if that Dem number does tick up, in the final stretch of early voting, then I think that's a pretty indicative sign of that our poll's heading in the right direction.
So what did you model this poll off of? Was it 2024 or 2025?
Neither.
Oh,
Um, but you could say that the electorate looks a lot like 2025. So pretty much what we do, and this is what we did in our second survey, is I think this is a thing where sometimes I think this waiting to an election can work in presidential. I don't think it's very smart to do it for these off year elections. Like if you were to wait your poll this year in 2026 for a November election in 2022, you're probably also going to get your butt kicked because 2022 was, yes, Republicans didn't have a gigantic red tsunami, but it was like, a Republican tilting year. Whereas right now we're probably looking at biggest wave since the Watergate babies in 1974 for the Dems, right? Bigger than 2018 by, probably at least a point. Um, so, what we do is, we look at data from Catalyst and AP Votecast. That gives us a good idea of like what elections look like in the past in terms of the partisan composition of Virginia, right? Because we don't have party registrations. It's just like I say I'm a Republican to the pollster, or I'm a Democrat, or I'm an independent. Um, and so the other part is that has been a really good barometer is the Gallup quarterly national party ID, right? If you just follow that, since uh, they've been doing it in 2015, you'll know who wins like the popular vote for president, right? It was like R+1 in their Q3 thing in 2024. And with President Trump's approval continuing to go down nationally, I'll get on that in a second when it comes to Virginia because that was actually really interesting. As well as the Gallup quarterly ID being it was D+7 in Q3 last year. Now it's D+10, right? And our poll was off on the partisan ID maybe by a point, underestimating a Dems, right? So you had probably a D+9 electorate. So I mean it's plus 11. It's 51 Dem, 40 Republican, 9 independent. Um, you know, so if you're not following current, public opinion, you're just looking at something in the past without, trying to see what else is going on now, you're going to be off. On President Trump's approval, this was actually really interesting. It hasn't moved since the election. It's actually technically gone up a point. His approval rating has gone up a point, but his disapproval still remains at 57%, which is interesting when we talk about, right? I mean, President Trump's approval is what, 5, 6 points worse compared to election day 2025. Um, so that was really interesting. And I think that either A, our poll is off and we're going to underestimate the Dems again, or maybe it just has to do with the polarization of Virginia's electorate, right? We're a southern state. He can only go so low with mainly white voters, and only so high with minority voters. So that was probably a really interesting part of the poll, I think. Um, Something I do want to note here, kind of bouncing back on the governor approval. Um, this I know that the Washington Post, yeah, article said, historically unpopular compared to this point in any governor's term, and people can talk about, well, what is their, why they think that is, right? But it's speculation, right? One thing I haven't seen people talk about, and when we talk about like why maybe Spanberger's approval is not really that strong, I think is maybe in part because of energy prices, right? She campaigned on affordability, and then we had this big, obviously snowstorm that came through. I was trapped in my house for 2 weeks. It was awful. And people saw like record energy prices, and then everybody's doing stories on it, right? It's like, well, I voted for you. You campaign on affordability. What's going on, right? Um, Obviously, governor has no control of that, right? But I think point being, people can quibble about it, but it's like we don't know. No, like we didn't do this in our poll. Um, we didn't ask like why do you disapprove of the governor. I would be interested in seeing that to see why. But one thing I will say is that I forget what they said at 538 on their podcast. But Republicans are known to boo harder in polling, right? They will get if they're upset about something, you will see it in a poll, right? So like Abigail Spanberger, uh, has what a 2 or 3% approval rating, I think, with likely voting Republicans in our poll, off the top of my head. So it's a very well known thing, but still, yeah, she won by 15 points. She's lost ground with some Democrats. I think one part that was interesting was black voters. She probably got 92 to 93% of the black vote. 15% of black voters disapprove of her, if I recall correctly. Um, so we can quibble about it as much as we want, but nobody knows for sure. I think Dwayne Yancey had a great article on this. I think a lot of conservative social media. You could also make the argument like, oh, she's attaching her name to the amendment. She broke a campaign promise, right? Said that she wasn't going to redistrict and is supporting this. We can quibble about like, you know, uh, the technicalities of it, but voters don't care about technicalities, right? They read what they read, and they make their opinions from it. So.
All right, so what's your key takeaway from this poll? What should people who are interested in Virginia politics and the redistricting amendment and Governor Spanberger, what should they take away from this poll?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I mean, this would make Governor Spanberger one of the most unpopular governors in the country. Um, you know, the highest she would be is the third. Um, if you're looking at Morning Consult, which we linked in the article, I will say I think that Morning Consult is maybe a little bit bullish on their gubernatorial ratings. That's my opinion, though. It's subjective, right? Unfortunately, there's no more, 538. Um, and there's no like good, you know, average of all the gubernatorial polls by state. Um, but that was something that I don't think the Post, Washington Post, when they were doing the article, like mentioned. Um, and I'm not really sure that she was ever popular in the first place. Once she came in, maybe there was in the lead up to, the election, right? There was all this conservative social media posts about like bills being proposed, bills being proposed. She hasn't signed anything yet, right? Um, I know that the Roanoke College had her, with a double digit approval in, about a month into her term, but also the Roanoke College was the least accurate pollster last year. So, take with that what you will. But she's had definitely lost some ground since the election. Whether people believe it's her fault or not is entirely up to probably your partisan allegiances, right? Leave me out of that. I just wanted to do the poll. So, but yeah,
And then what about on redistricting?
yeah, absolutely. Sorry, redistricting. Look, I think that the Yes campaign is favored. They spent a lot of money. I thought that this poll was going to be tighter, but I couldn't really tell until I ran the script. And I already mentioned that. They probably have maybe what 20% chance of winning thereabouts. For them, and
Who
in
would
order
the
for them to
Republican-
win, there
the
has to
Republican-
be like just much higher election day turnout, right? compared to what we have, right? Instead of it being at 47 to 48% election day, it's got to be closer to, like that 55%, but it's really got to come from like Republicans who didn't vote last year. Um, so that's kind of the thing. Like they got, and look, the people who are voting on election day are overwhelmingly against this thing. It's like 62%, I think, of no voters, or sorry, 60 the for election day voters, people who say they're going to vote on election day, it's like 62% Republican. Um, but again, there's that little quibble on like, well, probably some people in that poll are going to end up voting on election day, even though they say I'm a good little voter and I'm going to vote, early, right? Even though I haven't voted yet, and I've never voted early before. Um, but I think that the no campaign has a path. But look, I mean, uh, Trump was in the White House. This election is probably not going to look that much different than 2025. Um, and uh, it's really up to whether the no campaign, just has this big, big election day vote coming. And maybe that happens, I'll be calling up registrars with the State Navigate team, tracking pre-poll closing turnout, and we'll kind of get to see like, okay, who's turning up in all these very important localities, or who's not turning out, right? Like that was the thing on election day. I think maybe I knew by like what 11 a.m. or noon, maybe as early as 10 a.m. I don't know. That Spanberger is going to win because it's like where are the rural voters, right? Um, but yeah, so I think this is a competitive race. I know that it's kind of similar to the maybe a little bit of the conventional wisdom. It's not purposeful that this matches conventional wisdom. But people say that like, oh, it'll be similar to the J. Jones Martian, right? And, there's some little tidbits in there where, if the undecideds may go to the yes campaign. You can read the article more on that with our team's analysis. But yeah,
All right, Chaz Noticomb of State Navigate. I appreciate your time.
thank you for having me, man.